Hey everyone, quick video today on the New Left and some of the protests that are taking place here towards the end of the 1960s. And we'll get into this next week, but we'll start talking about hippies and the counterculture and a little bit of that next week. Protest music. You're gonna listen to some of it this week, but you'll have an assignment with protest music next week. So we'll look at Woodstock and hippies a little bit more, those types of things next week. But I want to talk about a couple of protest groups today. Um, and some groups, and what's going to happen here in the 1960s, you're going to have the formation of what is known as the New Left. And this involves a lot of young people. We're talking college age students, people in their 20s. There's a lot of protests. Half of the American population is under 30 by 1970. So um, you've got a lot of young people in America that form this new left. And there's a lot of Americans attending college. So you have a lot of young people in universities, which oftentimes lends to protest and some liberal thought in that sense. So 8 million Americans attending colleges, which is 8 times the number of people in college in 1950. That's a huge number of people. So one thing that's going to happen, the new left is going to embrace the cause of minorities. They're going to jump on board with the implementation of civil rights legislation, pushing for equality for minorities, for African Americans, Native Americans, the gay community. It's something we didn't talk about, but if you want to look at further, the gay liberation movement is going to take place in the late 1960s. The Stonewall riots take place in New York City. So there's a lot going on in the new left. And certainly the topic we're really focused on here is the new left and their kind of reaction to the Vietnam War, which is going to be a huge opposition to the war. A lot of young people in America. And Kent State is a great example of that taking place. So anyway, one group that you should know is a group called SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. They're created in 1962. It's a group. It's an organization for students, causes promoting civil rights, protesting the war. A very active organization that is viewed by many as a radical type of protest organization. Now, the faction at the end of the 1960s, SDS starts to splinter, and you start to have some of the more moderates of SDS. Then you start to have some more radicals. The most radical part of the SDS is a group known as the Weather Underground or the Weathermen. And these are people these are a group of young people who wanted to, who were okay with violence, radical action, in order to change the government. They wanted to overthrow the government, essentially. They wanted to, obviously, they were against the Vietnam War, but they also wanted to put in a communist-like society, but where there's equality for everybody. But it's a radical organization. They're going to resort to some bombings, some violent attacks. There's an arson. There are a number of things the Weathermen are part of, but they are the far left radical offshoot of SDS. This little video clip here gives you some examples of people who were part of the Weathermen. They're going to kind of be interviewed and talk about their experiences then. There is a little bit of language in this clip, so be warned. Couple bad words. They come out of the time period, but it is interesting to see people today. One of them is a college professor. And he talks about how when he tells his students he was trying to overthrow the government, nobody believes him. I thought that was an interesting clip. So take a look at that clip if you want. Optional, obviously. But the Weathermen are that far left kind of group. You looked at the draft last week. The draft is going to cause lots of protests, forcing people to go to war. Oftentimes is going to cause it always will cause some controversy. So especially imagine if you are anti-war and then you get drafted into a war that you were against to begin with. So certainly there are reasons for a draft, but in this case, it's just going to continue to stir up some of the controversy. And we looked at some of the lottery results. I hope when you did that assignment, you saw, it almost seems like a dystopian society when you see little pills coming from like a lottery type thing to determine whether someone's going to war. And again, if you want to look at the results, I gave you the thing last week. You can take a look at that. But the draft's going to cause controversy. Next week, I'm going to save this for next week, but we'll look at the counterculture and hippies and the long hair and the free love and the rock and roll, and certainly we'll look at Woodstock. And one thing I want to say about the Weathermen, they got their name, if you're wondering, from a Bob Dylan song, from a lyric in a Bob Dylan song. So music is very influential and kind of fueling some of the protests and the counterculture that exists in the late 1960s. So just a little bit there. There's Woodstock. There's a picture of Woodstock, something we're going to talk about next week. But I wanted to just kind of introduce a couple of things about the New Left. Make sure you do your reading assignment. There's a lot more in there about that. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.